Hello everyone, and welcome to a very quick TouchDesigner tutorial where I'm going to look at using a table to hold text, and I'm going to copy that very simply using a text top. No replicators or instancing needed. This is a quick and efficient way of mapping text to the screen. I came across this method as part of my January 2026 explorations. Basically, January is a series of prompts every day in January that give digital artists a creative prompt to explore. Today's was Bauhaus poster, and I made this geometric text copier thing. To be honest, it's not super Bauhaus visually. A quick introduction to the Bauhaus. Bauhaus was a German art school and art movement that sort of specialized in craft and arts, but in a very experimental way for the time. There are lots of contemporary artists who we know of, like Vasily Kandinsky and Paul Klee. And something that really stood out about Bauhaus was its very stark design, simple geometric shapes placed into various architectural and artistic areas. So you can see this was very modern for the time. And you have these kind of colorful things that kind of are reminiscent of Kandinsky's. This one's by Just Schmidt. But it was a really kind of inspiring art movement that kind of was curtailed by World War II and the Nazi Party. And if you search online, this is sort of the aesthetic of the Bauhaus in terms of the Bauhaus design. This technique also lends itself well to an art movement that I really enjoy called concrete poetry. And concrete poetry is a form of poetry where there's a visual component of how the words are placed and arranged. So these are some examples of concrete poems. I first came across this form of poetry through the experimental Canadian poet Christian Bock, whose work, crystallography, combines scientific diagrams, poetry, and visual art. There's not so much on the internet visually about this, but it's a really cool book if you ever get a chance to pore through it. Anyway, that's the intro done. Let's get into building this technique. Before we get started, I'm going to show you a little bit of what this looks like visually and what you can do with it. And these examples here are both going to be on my Patreon for subscribers. They contain annotated materials, so they are useful as additional resources to look at if you want to recreate this effect in addition to this tutorial, or if you want to look at some more advanced text and evaluation expressions. And the first example is a table of bird names. And there's thousands of bird names here. And basically what's happening is I'm using this table to text top copy method to copy information to a specific point on the screen. And I'm going to show you how you can select specific cells of that data, as well as pre-formatting the data to access these individual positions. We're going to look at just putting some text and numbers on the screen, but this can apply to any sort of information that you want to bring in from a file, like a text file or CSV. The other example is what I created today as my 21st January. And so if I press 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, we see slightly different mappings of this text as it maps to different geometries. And basically every point in my geometry is going to have a letter copied to it. So this one's a useful example if you want to access individual characters versus individual words, which you can see here. And what we have here is a little text input. So I can say, "Hi YouTube." And when I release that, we'll see that "Hi YouTube" has been copied. And you can make much longer text strings as well, kind of playing around with things like the grid arrangement. So let's just quickly do that. And obviously you can change things like the text size as well. Let's start our build. What I've brought in here is a CSV file that I found online of birds by common name. If we take a look at that, what we can see is we have a few things at the beginning that we want to remove before we get into some of these fun names like the Abbott's Babbler or the Acadia Tit. And if I scroll down, we can see we have thousands of names here. Let's go all the way to the bottom. And we can see we also have this list of birds by region that we might also want to remove. What I've added in here is a select DAT, and I've set it up with a little expression that lets me remove data that is shorter than a certain string length. And I've also set it to look for certain words. So if I go back to the top, it's taking me ages to navigate this, I'm removing common name, and I'm also removing list of birds by region. The select with the equation is available with the example files, but a quick and easy way of doing this is to add in a select. Let's go to select all rows. Let's do index and move this until we are at the beginning. So let's go back a little bit. So Abbott's Babbler, and then we just want to do, let's do -2, and that should do it for us. And this means we don't have to add in any code. The reason why I think it can be useful to input expressions is to add in filters for data on a larger level than having to just filter the top and the bottom, which we've just done. Anyway, we've now set up our data in a way that's useful to us, and I've just added in a null here that I've called bird names, and this is what we're going to reference for the text. The next thing I want to do is I want to create some kind of position. And this position can really be a top, a pop, or a chop, anything that basically gives us XY position that we can use to position this text. Because essentially, whatever we use to create these initial coordinates, we're going to bring out and we're going to place, and I'll actually add in a null first, but essentially we're going to bring this out into a DAT, where we're going to access all this information and use this as our XY positions. For this technique, as far as I'm aware, we can only use XY and we can't work with Z. Just for our example, we're going to use a grid, keep it really simple. And what I want to do here is under my attributes, I want to only access P. So we've got our P1 and 2. I'll bring this out to a select. Let's do by index. We'll remove the first row, and we'll also do select cols. And so we want to access X and Y, and we don't care about that Z col. So we just want X, Y positions. So that's great. And the next thing that we want to do is we want to merge the text with the XY positions. So I'm going to add in a merge. We want to have XY position as our first two columns. We'll add in bird names through this merge. And what I want to do here is append columns. So we have our X, Y, and then our text. And I'm going to add in a table. In that table, I'm going to expand it on the top. So I have 3 columns. I'm going to say X, Y, and text. And this is going to be merged in to our data. So we're going to add in a merge, connect it up. We don't have to change anything in this merge. And we'll see that now we have X, Y, and text. And this is data that we can provide to a text top. Let's add in our text top. I'm going to set the resolution at 1000 by 1000. And we'll bring down our font scale to a bit smaller. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in a null. And I'm going to drag this onto the specification DAT field. And now we can see that a bunch of text has been copied. What's important to remember is that we're moving from this geometry pop space, which is often between -1 to 1 or -0.5 to 1, into pixel space. So in this case, we're looking at something that's 0 to 1000 pixels. So what I'm also going to do here is I'm going to add in a math mix, and this is going to be what I use to scale the XY coordinates of these positions. So under operation, I'm going to say P times 1000, and we can see that that text is now slightly better copied. What I'm also going to do is I'm going to move this from the central coordinate just up so that we have our grid on the screen there. And we can see that this is now centered correctly, but we have a bit of an issue with actually reading this text. So I'm going to bring it down a bit in the columns. Let's see how much we'll take it down. Okay, let's do it to like 4. Let's do it to 4 and keep that at 20 so we have these lists. What we're seeing here is not the most optimal way of doing this, because we can also see we have a bunch of data down here. And what's happened here is the way that I've merged this is we have a bunch of data that doesn't have X, Y positions. So it's just going to be placed at the 0, 0 position. And what I'm going to do is show you a different way of referencing this data and getting a random selection from this list. So each of these points is going to be a random bird name selected from that list. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to take my grid and I'm going to create a random. And actually that's totally fine just to leave in there. You can see that this has moved around our visual. What we actually want to do is we want to go in, click set, change our random seed to 1, and then for attribute scope we'll say rand select. So create a new random attribute, and in this value A and value B, what I'm going to do for value B is I'm going to get the length of this bird names table. So I'm going to say op bird names dot num rows. Let's just look at that expression quickly so you can see. And we can see that there's 11,250 different values as part of that. Okay, so what I'm actually going to do here, and I'm going to remove this merge for now and remove this connector. So I'm going to neaten this up a bit with a null. I'll label this pos, and this will let us know that this is our XY position. And I'm actually going to copy this, and I'm going to create a new chain which is going to hold my rand select instead of my p. Under the select we can keep this the same, we just have that value. And what I'm going to do here is create an evaluate DAT. And what's really cool about evaluate is it lets us take an expression which we can either put in through a table in this slot here, or we can input into this expression field. So I'm going to make this a little bit wider. And what I want to do is I want to take the index of this section and access my bird table here. And that bird table is called bird names. And as an example of that, let's make this big so we can sort of see over here. As an example of that, if I was to put op bird names and access the 0, 0 index, what's going to happen is we're feeding through the 0, 0 index, which is Abbott's Babbler. What we want to do is we want to take the value that's coming in from here. That's our index. And what I'm going to say here, so the first value here is what lets us change the name that we're looking up. And what I want to do here is add in something that access is this value here, and what I want to say is int, so we access the integer value, and then I'm going to say me.input cell, close brackets, and now we are accessing all these different names. The length of this table should also match, so now what we can do is we can go back to this merge. I'm going to label this evaluate text selected, merge them together, make sure they're being merged as columns. There we go, that's what we want to see. And now click that back into this merge, and now we have a series of randomized bird names. Think about this as whatever data you have, you can make sure it's randomized using this process. This can be your selection criteria here, so you can change the seed, If you wanted, you could switch this out for a pattern so you could be more specific and not random about how you're grabbing that data. But basically, this ensures that our table is the same in all of the axes. And if I, for example, wanted to change the input, move it up or down, everything is now synced together. And you can do some super interesting things with this. Let's just quickly add in a few alterations just to make this fun. I'm going to do a noise. I'm going to animate the noise. See, it's moving around, maybe a bit more on the amplitude. You know what? I don't think a grid is the best way of viewing this either, so I'm going to add in a point generator. I'm going to switch it to a rectangle, and I'm just going to do 100 values. Remember that we have to move this into a scale that makes sense for us, so I'll do 0.5 by 0.5. And so now we're moving this around. Let's tweak this down to something that is a bit more visible. And the final thing I want to show you is how you can take this pop or geometry data and have this visualize alongside. So what I want to do is I want to take my geometry that's controlling the position. So we can see here it's in noise. This section here, I'm just going to color this yellow. This section here is for our text-based information. So we're scaling this up into pixel space. So basically you can use your aspect ratio or pixel space to scale this. But when we're actually visualizing these points or any data that's moving this around, we actually want to stick to our original coordinate system when we render that. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add in a null. I'll call this render out. And instead of just having a bunch of static points, I'm going to make a sphere that I'm going to copy, bring it down to like 0.2. I'm going to bring that into a copy, plug that in here, and now my noise is going to maneuver that around. It's quite big, so let's take this down to like 0.1. If you want to, for the noise, you can also just set this just to be pxy, and then everything kind of is going to fit when we play with that perspective. Okay, so now let's take this out to a geo. We can add in a camera and a render. And I'm just going to put like a constant material on for now. Doesn't really matter, but when you do this, you can be much more funky with your design. I'll plug this into the text and we can see now our aspect has changed. So let's make our render the same size as our output for the text, 1000 by 1000. What I like to do is set a universal value in my parent, and then when I change that, everything changes together. But for now, we'll just match via the common tab, just inputting. And what we want to do here is we want to scale this in the camera. And so for this, I'm going to go to View. I'm going to change it to orthographic, and I want it to be bottom left. And then for my ortho width, I'm going to select 1. Still very, very big on that sphere. 0.01. And now we can see that these geometrical points are all mapped to this coordinate system. The same thing would happen if, for example, I brought in my grid again. Let's bring that in. Again, let's just remember to move that up a little bit to center. We can move that down. That noise is doing some heavy lifting there, which is nice. But what I can also do, rather than copy this instant stuff, is I could just have my grid. And what I'll do is I'll just, rather than putting a line in, I'll just quickly switch it to topology wireframe. And we can now see that that text is now also matched to that grid. So you could be quite creative with this if you're using particles and you have plexus effects or any of that kind of stuff. This is the base effect. I'm going to save this, and this will be available for Patcher tier subscribers on Patreon. The other examples will be available on the component level for folks that want to dig in a little bit deeper and explore some more advanced table expressions and getting data in different formats to be placed on the screen. Thanks so much for watching, and I'm going to be posting lots more tutorials soon, including an overview of all the work I've done throughout January, as well as the much requested infinite memory machine tutorial. Thanks so much for watching, stay tuned, and see you soon.